Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Barker. I'm the Executive Director of Reuse Minnesota, and we want to thank you today for joining us for our swap, for our training, how to host a swap training for government staff. And we are doing this presentation and panel specifically for government folks because we know that there's some considerations when you are working for a public entity where you have access to different buildings or you have staff to actually plan events from your solid waste programs. So we know it's a little different than if you're planning it as a community group, a neighborhood association, a place of a worship community, where that might be volunteer time and space isn't necessarily the same access. So we are doing this one specific to government staff. We will be doing another training later this spring. I'm still working on the details of that, but if you know folks in the public sector or nonprofits that would like to, in the public or nonprofits that would like to do a training as well, we hope you will point them back to our website here when we get that scheduled. All right, so first I would like to introduce our panelists, and I really want to thank these three folks for joining us today. They all bring a different experience from doing swaps for the last couple of years, and they will share their wisdom specifically toward the end, and then they'll each take a turn sharing generally about planning swaps as we get started. So first, Kellie Kish from the city of Minneapolis. She will share later about their garden tools swap. Sutherland from the city of Inver Heights, and they have done winter clothing swap. And Kirsten Wahlberg from Dakota County. They have done fix and swaps and an outdoor gear swap. And again, my name is Emily. I'm the Executive Director of Reuse Minnesota, but I also worked previously for the city of St. Louis Park, where we did clothing, gardening, and media swaps. All right, so to start us off, we want to talk about why do swaps? So as a government entity, why would you choose to do a swap? And there are a few different reasons, and it may depend on your specific organization. So if you are working on climate related goals and you need to achieve some environmental goals, this is a really great way to do that. That gets you beyond recycling or before recycling. I know a lot of us really feel like we are mostly just staffed in order to do our recycling programs and get those programs to folks. But there is a shift, and we are seeing the need that after 30 some years of talking about recycling as our primary focus, that moving up that waste hierarchy. I didn't actually put that in here, which I think is sort of funny, given it's a government one. I always put that, that image in there, but you all know the inverted triangle, where we talk about waste reduction and reuse are at the top, and then recycling and composting are in the middle, but we spend the majority of our work in those middle bands. And so this gives us an opportunity to move up and recognize those environmental benefits of waste reduction. Gives us an opportunity, especially if you are in greater Minnesota, where you are dealing with landfills or in the metro here, whether you're in a landfill community or a waste energy community, it just helps decrease the amount of waste going into disposal overall, and encourages people to think about how they can reuse in their lives. The social benefits, some of you may be in communities that are looking for ways, especially after COVID, to reconnect your community and to get people connected in a unique way. And this is a really fun way to do it, because the economic benefit is that there's also no cost generally to residents. Most of the time, these are done at no cost to people who want to attend. And so that gives you an opportunity to connect the folks in your community in a fun and unique way. And then, of course, overall decreasing the cost of disposal, as we all know, is only going up. And so the less we can put into those disposal systems, the better. The next thing I want to talk about before the panel starts is the types of swaps. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. Literally, you can swap just about anything. Some of the common things that are often seen are clothing, specifically winter clothing, or things like costumes. That's a fun one if you want to do something that's more oriented toward families or kids, but also adults. Anybody can dress up, so costumes are fun. In the fall, gardening supplies, books, games, and movies, outdoor gear, kids' toys, household decor. You could even be as specific as kitchen gadgets, any sort of swap that you want to do, depending on how much you want to scale it. And so the more specific you are will determine the size of the event. But there's no limit, and you can be creative too. All right, so each panelist is going to take a turn on talking about the stages of the swap. So there's the pre-event, which is obviously for us the majority of the work. We're planning the location, timing, who our partners are, how we're going to promote it. The during the event is a very short window, and then the post event is dealing with the stuff that's at the end. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kirsten, who is going to discuss some pre-event planning.
Yes, thanks, Emily. You can hear me?
You sound great.
Great. So yeah, like Emily said, I'm just going to start talking through some of the pre-event logistics. So these were things that we all kind of put our heads together and agreed on were important topics to talk about today. So planning, it's important to think pretty far out in advance for booking like this space. I recommend starting to book your space maybe 6 to 8 months out. I know for like our spaces that we were looking at hosting our event at, we're all like Dakota County buildings, and our buildings are really nice spaces where the public likes to have like their events there too. And so we like to try to get there before all the public are fighting over these spaces. So I'm trying to think maybe 6 to 8 months out, maybe even a year, but it's just something that you have to be aware of when you're planning your event. For volunteers and staffing, we recommend trying to get more volunteers than you think that you need. I remember a number that Emily sent me back when I was first starting to plan these swaps. She recommends aiming for about 6 to 8 volunteers for her events. And that was my goal when I was planning our events. So trying to make sure that you have enough volunteers and staffing so that people aren't like stressed out and trying to manage this event will be to your benefit. So for recruiting, I know that Dakota County has like a general volunteer list where people can sign up just for any type of community event. And that was actually how we got the bulk of our volunteers for our events. That was kind of nice. And then we also recruited to our master recycler composter class. So it was pretty easy for us to recruit volunteers for our event. And people really like to participate in the swaps, which is kind of nice. For training, I know we didn't do a whole lot of training. I don't know about any of you, but I just did like a Word document where I explained like what to expect at a swap. And I kind of walked volunteers through like what a resident would see when they first walk in. They set down their item, they have to check in, they have to weigh their item. And then the day of the actual event, I talked them through the same process. And then we also talked about like why this is important. And that was really nice for the volunteers who were more general, who might not have had that background. For audience, we had to think about like, are you going to limit the demographics? So are you going to limit this by age, by gender, or is it going to be open to all? I know that in the Twin Cities Metro, we have like a women's clothing swap that happens usually once a year. That is an excellent swap to go to, or we've had like toy swaps. So those are two pretty specific demographics. I know for us, we wanted to make sure that our events were very open to all. We wanted everybody to feel welcome at our swaps. And it's just something that you have to think about when you are planning your own, and being pretty clear in your promotional materials, like who is invited to these kinds of events. The what, clearly identifying what will and won't be accepted. I don't think I have to spend a whole lot of time on this. Just that as a government person, as somebody who's super busy, I don't want to be like running around after the event trying to dispose of these leftovers as garbage. And so something that helps me talk to residents about like what kind of items they should be bringing is ask them, is this something that you'd feel comfortable giving to your family member or a friend? And if you're embarrassed to give this to somebody that you know, then maybe you should not be bringing it to a swap. So that was something that we did on like our website and our promotional materials, was identifying exactly what we wanted, and then maybe leave these items at home, things that are dirty, broken, but just being very clear before your event. It's good to have a tracking plan before your event. So we used just like an Excel spreadsheet. I would be happy to share my Excel spreadsheet with you if you're interested, but it's very similar to like a Fix-It Clinic check-in process where we're asking residents' names, the city that they come from, the item that they have, and then how much that item weighs. And in order to get those weights, we used 2 different kinds of scales. The first scale is like a fish scale, or excuse me, a fish scale. It was like a food scale where it could weigh like goggles or a necklace, something smaller, and then a larger scale where it could weigh like up to 200 pounds. So it's good to have those two different types of scales available at the event because we saw all sorts of different kinds of items coming in. And then it's also important to think about what kind of surveys you might want for residents. Do you want them to be anonymous? So giving people paper surveys that they could fill out and give to you. Or do you want it to be more public and have like the large post-it notes where they can like write, I loved this event, it was awesome, have more, things like that. All right, ready? So thinking through the location itself, obviously you want to have a good sized room. You want to give enough space for people to spread out. You don't want people walking all over each other, especially during a pandemic, I tell you. This next bullet is something I'm excited to hear more about from Allie, is the pre-event drop-off. So you have to decide if this is something that you want to do. In our past events, we decided against doing a pre-event drop-off just because we would need somebody on site to like accept those items or like a space to store those items before the event. But also allowing people to drop off these items really makes it easy for those who want to arrive at the event at 1 o'clock, right when the event happens. So they'll actually have things to look at when they first get there. But also for those residents who have to work right during my event that runs from 1 to 3 p.m. on a Saturday. And so it's allowing them the opportunity to participate in an event if they might not want to just like take their item to like a reused retailer in the region. They can feel like they can participate in a community event without actually having to be there on that day at the exact same time. So also thinking through some accessibility items, maybe choosing a space where it has easy access to public transit and or parking. I think in the Twin Cities Metro, that shouldn't be that much of an issue. Thinking through some logistics, making sure that you have more tables than you may think that you need. I think most of the swaps that we've talked about so far we've used tables to display our items. And so maybe think through, do you need to rent any additional tables or do you have enough? Just things to think about beforehand. And then electrical if needed. I don't know if a lot of the swaps that we've talked about have needed electrical, but at our event, we would plug in like maybe my laptop just to track the event information, but then also allow space for residents to like try an item out. So they could like plug in like a lamp or something if they wanted to take it home. And I think that that's important to offer to residents to try an item out for later, just to make sure that it works. And then lastly, just thinking through if you're going to need to get any permits or fill any sort of rental agreements, if there's going to be any fees beforehand. I don't think we're talking about this later, but some events do charge cover fees. And that cover fee, maybe it's like $5 that could go towards paying for the facility that you're renting. So that's something that I've seen in the past as well. So just decide if that's something that you would like to do. We as a county, we decided not to charge any sort of cover, but that's something that every organizer has to decide. And then also this bullet that says that many public buildings can be used for no cost. So it doesn't hurt to kind of look around and see what kind of public buildings you could use and if they might give you a discount because you're a government person. All right.
All right, so hello everybody, Kelly here. I'm going to start talking a little bit about our timing for events. So along with all of your promotions and pre-planning, you do really want to pick the day and time that is going to work best for your audience and or be as inclusive as possible for everyone who you would like to attend your event. So Emily has mentioned in the past for City of St. Louis Park, they have a large Jewish population, so they typically avoid Saturdays to make sure that everyone can participate. Many folks choose to avoid Sunday mornings for folks who are attending church services to be able to go. Planning in afternoons on weekends tends to work well to make it as available as possible for everyone. And then of course, if you're holding an event on a weekday, clearly the evening time, which would allow parents, the ability to get to the event after work, also the ability to get home, make dinner and get kids into bed is a nice consideration for the timing of your event. Along with timing, as Kirsten mentioned, the planning 6 months out in advance. So for City of Minneapolis and our garden tool swaps, we want to have those, early enough in the spring where people haven't already, gone out and purchased brand new items, or haven't started all of their seeds, or, already purchased things from farmers markets to plant. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not holding it too early so that it is in the middle of winter still, because we want people to get out and about and participate in the event. Some folks like to co-plan the event with other happenings, whether that be fix-it clinics or other neighborhood and community events that are occurring. That can help with some of your cross promotions to get more people to your event that may not have been aware of it through the methods that you use to promote. So definitely pay attention to what's going on in your community and whether or not there's some of those co-event planning opportunities to help increase the amount of attendees you have. Some events allow for backup rain dates to be able to still hold the event. I think, kind of going into your timing or planning, if your event location is indoors, you clearly may not need a backup date. For outdoor events, if you are not planning a backup date, make sure your promotions will say, rain or shine, it's happening at this day and this time. And then for the length of an event, only a couple hours is, I think, something that all of us would recommend. If you go for too long, you run the risk of, people showing up 5 minutes before it ends, or nobody showing up at the beginning. So really having a shorter event does allow you to get a critical mass of people there, materials swapped, and then also, of course, it reduces the needs for volunteers and staffing time during the day as well. So some things to think about there on timing. For partners, there's quite a few different types of partners and periods of the event where you will have different partners. One obviously is going to be the location. Where are you going to host the event? Who is going to be, your location partner, your location partner can also help be a promotional partner. So for our garden tool swaps, we partner with neighborhood and community groups that are in the area where the events are being held, also with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, because that is where the event is also being held in a park property within this certain community. You can also work with community groups, nonprofits, churches. Again, those same people can help you promote in addition to others. So we like to promote using all sorts of different communication tools. So we also partner with city's communication department, other departments who can get things out through electronic news. And then for events where there are items that are going to a physical other organization rather than just an exchange between people, or for the leftovers from events, you will have partners from nonprofits to libraries, which may be a book library, it may be a toy library, it may be a tool library, and then also to secondhand stores that may be taking these leftover items so that they don't end up in the trash. So lots of different potential partners to be thinking about, and again, lots of different stages of the event where you will have these different partnerships. Good to get them all planned well in advance prior to the event, really even starting to promote the event. And then going on to promotions, use as many tools as you want or as few as you want, depending on how big you want your event to be. So for our first garden tool swaps last year, we honestly didn't do a ton of promotion because we didn't want to be completely bombarded our first year going about doing this with way too much material, not enough people. So we didn't go quite as big as we're going to go this year with our promotions. We did use the city's social media account. We asked council members to send it out in their newsletters, and again, just asked our neighborhoods who were near the event locations to help do some promotions. This year, we're going to go a little bit farther and see how much more we can get out there for different, for your different methods. Make sure you've starting your promotion well in advance with some save the date type messages, with a couple of reminders as the event gets near. Some folks will do promotions, the morning of and or even right at the start of your event to try and get folks to make sure that they stop by and check it out and exchange some items. We've also done promotions on site, so you can print flyers and hang them up well in advance. If leading up to the event, you have the opportunity to use like a billboard out front where they can change the letters saying like swap event Saturday or Sunday, or even yard signs are really useful at helping to, again, remind people that this is the event location, here's the dates and times. And then on your promotional materials, particularly the print items, again, try and be clear about what it is you do want and what you don't want. And then with like this picture you see here, the social media image, when you click on the image or the link, it takes you to a web page that has all of that information very clearly detailed out. And then just some of our other promotional partners, we've asked, the city's sustainability office and Homegrown Minneapolis, which is the Food Council, neighborhood and community relations, and others to try and help promote the events far and wide.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everyone. I'm Allie. So I'm going to be talking about during the event considerations. So we did lay out these ideas. So the first is going to be just the time it takes to set up and take down. Make sure that, you're considering the time it's going to take outside of the event time. So for example, how much time is it going to take to set up? That could include bringing your pre-event drop-offs if you are accepting those to the event space if they're not already there. Do you need to set up tables, signage, all your scales, that sort of thing? And then also one thing to consider is to try to enlist maybe some help. For example, we hosted ours at the community center. Are there folks there that could maybe help you set up the tables beforehand? So make sure to factor that extra time for both the setup, but also the takedown. You're gonna have to clean up the space. You might have a lot of items there. Factoring that into the reservation that you're making if you are doing a rental for the area. And again, it's the setup and takedown is real. The amount of time it takes is really going to depend on what type of event you're hosting. For example, on the screen, you can see an outdoor event. You're probably not going to have a lot of tables for that. So in that case, it might not take as much time. But if you are indoors and you have a lot of items or tables that need to be setting up, it might just take a bit more time. So keep that in mind. For the event layouts, typically how they're set up based on talking with the other panelists, it sounds like everyone has utilized the same sort of layout where at the entrance you have tables, and those are going to be your check-in tables. They typically have your scales, and then also someone that has kind of like a check-in sheet where they're itemizing or just trying to get an idea of what type of items you're bringing out. And then from there, once they're weighed, the items are weighed and processed, either the event attendee or a volunteer is going to take those items and bring them to the designated either tables or areas. For signage, we have a few considerations. So one is directional signage, and that could include signage for traffic, but also like building signage, something to consider. If depending on who you're inviting, for example, we promoted to not just Inver Grove Heights residents, but also neighboring communities. They might not be familiar with the building that you're hosting it in. So make sure inside the building, not just to say it's in one community room, but consider directing them to the right space. Also, table signage or the area you're collecting. Typically, what I've found is that at swaps, we're encouraging folks to kind of sort their items. So for ours, for example, we had the winter clothing swap, and we had coats in one section, boots in one section. It just makes it easier for those that want to come in and swap to go to the table or the area that has the item that they're interested in. And then, so make sure to label those clearly and also visibly so people do bring them to the right spot. And then Lastly, we added a sign for accepted items. And I think this makes it easier if it's, at the entrance of the event, and you're kind of limiting the confusion of what can and cannot be brought in. So once people get to the table, hopefully they will have already reviewed that. And it's just a final reminder once they get up to that table. So for tracking participation, this can be for weights and items, just overall tracking of things that are coming into the event. So this is really the process that you're using is going to be based on the level of data that you're interested in. And from what I've found, I think it's probably going to depend on your event. If you want to collect attendance, you certainly can do that as people come into the event. If you want to collect the total weight of the item swapped, what we did and what I believe others have done is that as the items come in, you weigh them. You can certainly weigh the whole bag. You don't have to weigh it individually. You're collecting that total weight that enters the event. You also, if you are collecting the pre-event drop-offs, make sure that you're weighing those prior to them being brought into the event as well. That's important. And then at the very end of the event, anything that's left over, you have to reweigh everything. And then the difference of what was brought in versus what is remaining is the total weight that was swapped at the event. And then you can also track not just attendance and the weights, but you can also track what item types are coming in. You could do this very detailed by tracking, every single type of item that comes in. I think that would be a lot of work. What we did is we made a checklist of just the general items that could be brought in, for example, coats, boots, scarves, and we were trying to keep tallies just to see what was the majority of items brought in and maybe what wasn't brought in, just to kind of get an idea of the interest in items out there. For unaccepted items, so that sign that I had mentioned about listing the accepted items, I think that's a really great place to start. Have that before the person gets to you, but once the attendee does bring the items to you, you're going to want to process each item, even if it's a large bag. So what we did, we had the person weigh their items and then they went to the next table. And even if it was a large bag, we had them dump it out. You have to sort through every item just because you don't want those unaccepted items entering the event. In the case that they're there at their end of the event and your donation partner might not accept them, you don't want to be left over or have items left over that you don't know where to take them to. So if you do get to the situation where someone has brought in that accepted item, you can certainly make sure that they don't bring it into the event. What I've found is that people are very understanding and usually very, apologetic, and they did not mean to do that. Depending on your event, you could ask them to bring it to their car, but if your event is small enough and they seem trustworthy, I don't think that they're probably going to bring it to a table. I think that really depends on, the size of your event and what sort of volunteer supervision you have. But I think you can make that judgment based on your event. And then so lastly, pictures. Just remember to take pictures. It's always a great way of telling the story, either in future promotions or, if you're presenting to leadership or just trying to host it in the future. Always great to have pictures. So then on to post-event considerations. So for unswapped items, you will be most likely, depending on your situation, donating these items to whatever organization you've selected to partner with. Make sure to have that plan in place of who will be either bringing the items there or picking them up after the event. And the most important part, I think, is when that's going to happen, because that's going to dictate the space you need. So for example, our event happened late at night, and it was a late at night on a Friday, and I work Monday through Friday. So I didn't bring the remaining items to the donation partner until Monday. So you just have to make sure you have space available, whether that's the event space or if it's a different space, just keep that in mind. And then also, make sure when they're going to be picking it up. If they're not picking it up until a couple days later, or maybe that morning, make sure that whoever is in charge of renting out that space knows you might be leaving stuff in that area. So make sure to collect all the data like we've talked about and use it to tell your story. And I was thinking it's important, to have that for promotions, obviously grant reporting, but Also, again, just to tell the story to leadership, make sure that people buy into the event and are excited about it just as much as you are. And then you can also share that data, with the partner organization. I think that in some cases, depending who you're working with, they might like to share the story as well and to show their community participation. And reflections, always helpful to do this part right after you host the event where it's fresh in your mind. Just consider what worked well, what concerns did you have, or maybe other city staff, such as, your supervisors or whoever you're reporting to. And, were those considerations valid? And lastly, what would you maybe change for future events or do differently?
All right. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing those high-level kind of big picture considerations. As you can see, there are a lot of different things that you may want to think about as you move forward in planning an event. Each of our panelists have shared little bits about their specific events, but we're going to go ahead and give them each a chance to share more details about those events, their participation and such related to that. So if we will start with Kellie and her garden tool swap.
All right, so garden tool swaps, let's see. The reason we wanted to start with garden tool swaps is with the pandemic, there's a lot of victory gardening happening. A lot more people were interested in planting their own plants, growing their own food, having a little bit more resiliency within their own home and neighborhood. So we wanted to start with garden tool swaps, and the size that the city is, we knew that we could not do just one event location. So to make it at least somewhat equitable for all of our residents to have a closer place to go, we started with 4. So 1 per quadrant in the city. We did them for 2 hours, all at the exact same time. Had over 200 people participate, and just over 700 items were brought. And during the events themselves, somewhere between 55 and 72% of items were swapped within those 2 items throughout the 4 different locations. One thing that we did, so we talked with Emily prior to, or in our planning process for these events. And one thing that we did not do the same as St. Louis Park. St. Louis Park did not want to, or promoted, they did not want the small black plastic pots. And I think, one, because the city of Minneapolis is the hauler, we didn't have any potential, well, if there's leftovers, we're going to have to pay for disposal because they were going to end up in a garbage cart anyway. So we did not specifically exclude those from our list of accepted items. And I was very shocked to find out how many people wanted those small little individual black plastic pots. And again, it's because so many people were, starting their own seeds and trying, so they were a hot commodity at the events. The one thing we did really promote was nothing that you couldn't carry. I don't know how someone could easily, I guess someone could easily carry that push lawnmower, but trying to make sure that the locations we picked were conveniently located, had large parking lots for those able to drive, but also in communities where folks could walk and carry things directly home. So things too large to carry were an item we did not want. Our original game plan with extras after the event was to give them to community gardens, but in the planning process discovered that, community gardens really don't want pots. And that was a lot of what our extras were. Our events last year were conveniently planned the same day as the Minnesota Composting Council's Plate to Garden event over at the Urban Growler. So myself and a Green Corps member last year loaded up our cars and drove everything over there because the entire purpose was to get materials reused and not thrown away. And it didn't really matter who was going to be reusing them. But the picture you see in the lower right corner are the only items that were unswapped from those 700 items. The ones that were able to be recycled were recycled and the rest were thrown away. And unfortunately, those garden shears were an item that our volunteers didn't check very clearly because they were very much damaged to a point beyond repair. So we did take them and pull out the handles and make sure the metal did get recycled as scrap metal. So a couple of things that we're going to be doing differently this year. We are expanding it even more to 7 locations, and we're going to go for an extra hour because we did hear from some folks that the 2-hour time period was not quite sufficient. We are going to be doing additional training of our volunteers for the tracking of items to make sure that damaged items are not brought. Because quite a few of those pots that were not taken were also damaged and should not have been dropped in the first place. And we're going to ask that the community partners, our neighborhood and community groups and the parks find a place where the extras can stay within their community, and that then they can promote them on their Buy Nothing groups or through their neighborhood newsletters, social media sites, to try and keep all those items within that community itself. And then if needed, we can send, a truck around to pick up any extras. But seeing as though over the course of, a weekend, we were down to less than 30 items that needed to be recycled or disposed of, we're hoping that by extending the message of where these extras are within the community, that the items can stay within the community they came from. I think that is pretty much the overview of our last year event and our this year event. So thank you.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the city of Inver Grove Heights. We had a winter clothing swap last December. This was our first swap event, so it was just as new to us last year as it probably is to you. So we swapped outdoor gear, winter outdoor gear, which was coats, boots, hats, mittens, snow pants, and scarves is how we promoted that. We had 19 participants. We collected about 200 pounds of clothing, and about 30 of that was swapped. The remaining was then donated to a local low-cost thrift store that also functions as a food shelf. And if you're familiar with the Southeast Metro, the partner's name is Neighbors Inc. So they were willing to partner, and it was really fun working with them, kind of more of a localized organization. So what worked well, this obviously is essentially a no cost event, which is a little different than any other event that we typically host for collections. We almost always have, some vendor to pay. So in this case, because it was a no cost event, I felt that we could expand the promotions past Inver Grove Heights, but also to neighboring communities, which was really fun because like I said, we're typically limited by costs. And I felt like there was only, in my case, a positive impact of doing this because I felt it would increase the amount of items that were available to be swapped at the event, which only makes the event more successful in my opinion. And then it also would promote, our community center to other neighboring communities, people that might not have been aware of it. And then also it connected me to a lot of new community groups that I normally don't reach out to. For example, schools, the school district, they're joined with other neighboring communities. So typically, reaching out to the school is a pretty big undertaking or might result in a lot of attendees, but it was fun to connect with them. So that was one of the things that went well for us. And then I've seen a couple questions in the chat. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the pre-event drop-off that we did. So first off, it definitely was not something that we were promoting extensively. We definitely were encouraging people to attend the event. That was the main goal. But we did note on the website that, if you can't attend the event, you can contact me and there would be a limited opportunity for drop-off. So I made it where it wasn't, the first option, and it was clear that it was preferred to attend the event. And by doing that, again, wanted people to attend the event. We did have a good amount of people, I want to say probably at least 10 people drop off prior to the event. And I felt like we did collect a lot that way. As Kirsten already had noted, the main benefit of doing that is that at the very beginning of the event, you have items already there. So when people show up right at the start time, there's already items for people to look through. My fear was that, we wouldn't get a really good amount of items until maybe midway through the event. But the downside is that I think a couple folks had mentioned it in the chat is that, this really only functions as a donation opportunity. It doesn't allow those people that show up to reuse an item or swap an item, which is really the main point of this. So that's why we did focus on sharing the opportunity if people could not attend the event, but also limiting that by encouraging event participation. And then I think one question I saw was the amount of time. What I did is online, I think that I promoted just to contact me, but closer to the event, I decided that I would only allow for folks to come in the week of. And what I did actually is, because I'm office out of City Hall, I had people bring it to City Hall, and I have spaces in our City Hall where I can collect items. And again, because people were contacting me first to set up that time, if for whatever reason I ended up getting way too many items collected, I would have just limited it and said, sorry, we're no longer, we're at capacity, something of that sort. So it was very much under my control at that point, but it did require me to bring the items to the event space. So what concerns did we have? There weren't really any major concerns. I think the big question was, is our community going to be interested in this? And what I found is just through social media engagement and then the reaction of the school district that yes, there was definitely a lot of interest. And then going forward, what would we do differently? I thought it was important to note that our communications department had, so this was hosted in December, and we kind of had a campaign going on that was more geared towards the holidays of, giving around Thanksgiving and attitude of gratitude, stuff like that. And I think that because this event was seen as a way to give to the community, or, let go of items you might not need, your neighbors may be in need of it, I think the messaging can get a little twisted. And what I found is that some people at the event were coming to more so donate, and they were looking at items and they maybe felt like, per their own thoughts, that they weren't as in need of the item as somebody else would be. And so for that, I felt like it actually hindered the reuse going on at the event. So I just wanted to caution that when you do go to promote, be very cautious of using the word donation or giving to your neighbors, that sort of thing. And I think I'm just going to be more cognizant of that and to really just try to foster as much reuse and swapping as we can. And then lastly, you can probably tell just from our numbers, our event was actually not very well attended, in my opinion, and it was largely due to the weather. We actually hosted this on that really big winter snowstorm, if you recall, that happened this past December. And I ended up hosting it because we had done this pre-event drop-off, and I didn't want to be stuck with all of these awesome items that could be swapped. So if you do host a pre-event drop-off, I would encourage you to consider confirming a rain date or a backup date, and making sure that that's something that you can truly host it on if need be, or maybe consider hosting it for a two-day stint. So there's always going to be that guarantee of being able to have those items swapped before you do offer that donation. That's going to be something that I'll consider in the future, but that's my update.
All right, I'll try to be quick. So Dakota County has hosted 2 different types of outdoor gear swaps. So I wrote a note to myself to explain why we did outdoor gear, and it's because we had a partnership with our parks department. So they had like an education table. They had folks like outdoors teaching people how to use outdoor gear if they maybe didn't know like how to set up a tent. So that was kind of a fun partnership. So that's why we focused on outdoor gear. So our first event was in 2019. We had 75 residents, 61 items were brought in, 40 of them were swapped, 19 donated for reuse, added up to about 225 pounds diverted from the landfill. So when I say fix and swap, I literally mean we had a swap in one side of the building at Dakota, at Thompson Park. It was at the senior center. And then we had a fix-it clinic right next door that was in Dakota Lodge, in that nice, really beautiful meeting space. We did it that way because we were trying to kind of build upon the residents who are already familiar with the fix-it clinic. And since this was our first event, we wanted to kind of use that as a promotional opportunity to get more people to come to our swap. The people that are already loving the Fix It Clinic could maybe just walk over to the swap portion. And we did find that it did bring some people to our event. So the pros of having the fix and swap, I think it was a really cool event. When I did see broken items, because I made sure that I was at the check-in table, like looking at items. If we did find any broken things, I could easily be like, hey, you can bring your items right next door. So that was actually a pretty nice benefit. The cons, if there are any cons, was that it was a lot of coordination. So at the time we were working with a Fix It Clinic facilitator, and so he was in charge of managing those volunteers on like that side of the event. And then I was in charge of the swap portion, those volunteers, and we did keep our events separate. And then it was also a lot more coordination, like booking the senior center, booking Dakota Lodge, working with the Parks Department. So it was a little bit more complicated for an event, but it was a fun pilot event. Okay, next slide. And then our second event, this was just held in 2021. This was held on Halloween. So we had 27 residents bring 75 items, 40 items swapped, and then all leftovers I had volunteers bring to a Goodwill. They brought in a lot of heavy things. We saw a lot of like golf clubs, tents, lots of like heavy like skiing equipment. So that's why it added up to 428 pounds, which is awesome. Obviously there was lower attendance at this event. That could be due to many reasons. I think because this was right during the Delta variant scare for COVID. So definitely having an event during a pandemic, I don't necessarily recommend it. Apparently that day there was also like a football game. This is on Halloween. So there's just all sorts of reasons as why like maybe residents didn't come to this event. But I do think that we saw a lot of really quality material coming in. Going forward, we're planning on shortening our event time. It's funny that the city of Minneapolis is extending their event time. We're shortening ours because it seems like most people come right at the beginning to our events. They come right at the beginning and then it's like the last hour is dead. So we're shortening ours to 2 hours. Also, we are working with a new partner. They're called Ally. They're based out of, I think it's South St. Paul, and they literally connect homeless people to like outdoor gear items. So if there's like someone who is homeless, experiencing homelessness, they are actually getting these people like tents or sleeping bags. And these are all things that we saw at our outdoor gear swap. So any leftovers that we may have, I'm allowing Ally to come in and look at and kind of pick before we would take any leftover items to Goodwill. So they're getting the first choice pick of our leftover items that residents don't necessarily take at the event. So I'm really excited about that partnership, knowing that our materials are going to be used again and going to those in need.
Thank you, Kirsten and Kellie and Allie. I really appreciate you sharing your experience. I'm going to share just a little bit about my swap of work at the City of St. Louis Park. We, as I mentioned, did clothing, gardening, and media swaps. And some data here, I won't read this, but as you can see with our clothing swaps in particular, they grew every year and we outgrew every space we were in and had to keep getting bigger and bigger. I know this year they're going to do another one at another location that's even bigger than the one before. But I will note that when we talk about needing tables and planning for tables, especially if you're considering a clothing swap, we had 40 tables and filled every single one at our last clothing swap in 2019. Which had 190 people and 2,300 pounds of clothes. So when I say you need a lot of tables, we say that it's not a joke. If you think you might have a lot of people, especially things like clothing, because you don't want that pile of clothes to get too deep. If it gets more than about 12, 15 inches, that stuff that comes in earlier never resurfaces. And it's really hard to ensure that you're actually swapping material. On that, I didn't include the exact numbers, but generally speaking, what I found for our clothing swaps, and this was pretty consistent year to year, is that 60% of the material that came in was taken out and swapped by the folks who came, and 40% ended up being donated. We did have one year, we did some textile recycling where we specifically told people, bring this for recycling. And without going into detail, because we don't have time for that, I did not feel comfortable doing that going forward. One, because we had way too much material coming in for that. And also just questions about where actual legit recycling options are for textiles, and so just didn't want to deal with that. So we did that only 1 year. We also included accessories and shoes in our clothing swaps, was kind of inclusive of if you wear it. This is one event though where I had to start getting specific about what we did not want, because we had people bring anything that fell in the textile. So basically anything made out of fiber. So we had towels and sheets and blankets, and I ended up having to throw away some of that stuff or donate it. You know, you could do with shelters and things like pet shelters, but it just ended up being a lot of material I did not want to deal with at the end. The next one we did was the gardening swap, and this was tools very similar to what Kelly Gardner's garden tool swap is. We did not track this partly because it just felt a little bit overwhelming to track weights or whatnot. I would imagine that they could do the numbers, which I think is a really great way just to actually tally the number of items. We pretty much just tracked people on this one, and that worked out well. As you can see, 2021, we did that last summer or last spring, and definitely was impacted by the pandemic. That was an outdoor event, but it still was a decreased number. But we were still quite happy with the number of folks who came, given that we were in the pandemic. And then the other one is the media swap, and we did a 2020 swap literally in January of 2020. So before the pandemic got going, that's why you see no masks here. But we had 2,500 pounds of material. It was pretty wild. Of course, books and media get heavy quick, but a lot of material came in, and a lot of it swapped. We donated a lot. We had the library, that picture earlier, the library took a bunch of what they wanted for their program, for their book sale. And then we had some schools that came and took things for their programs. I took books to the Little Free Libraries and distributed them through my Buy Nothing group. We took VHS to Goodwill because that was one thing. There were certain things with the media swap that I learned from the first year. We accepted cassettes, and I basically threw away so many cassettes. And so I did not allow those the next year. But vinyl, super popular. And so that's great. And we do actually have a place in St. Louis Park that will recycle or have vinyl available to people who do artwork if there are damaged ones. So that ended up working out well, but there was very little vinyl left the last couple of events. So that's a very brief summary of the City of St. Louis Park ones. The one I just realized overall, the greatest thing about this is that we were able to engage a lot of different people that we didn't engage in some of our other programs. And so I think that's one of the best benefits that we realize as a city. You see a lot of faces that you recognize, but then there were tons of people that we didn't see at other events. And so it was just a really fun way. And I loved having kids, teens who would come with their parents at the clothing swap or the book swap and take whatever they wanted and not have to pay, which was really kind of fun as a kid. All right, we have about 5 minutes for questions. I know that there was one in here, Allie, that I think maybe you have answered completely about, or no, what was Lydia's question about?
Yeah, she ended up answering
that. Okay, that's what I thought, that we got them all answered. I wanted to bring up Colleen's question about the word swap, because this is something I actually struggled with myself. And whether you call it a swap event, a share event, I kind of like the word share. So if you're not big on the word swap, or if your residents struggle with that word, something like a community share is a good way to do it. Swap is just a really common word, but with that, we were always very clear that people did not have to bring things in order to participate. Anyone could participate, whether or not they brought things or took things, although we would prefer that people take things so we have less to deal with. But if you don't love that word swap, you're not alone. It is sometimes a struggle just because of the image that it brings up for folks. But we were always really clear that even if you don't have anything, feel free to come. Anybody can take anything. We did not want that to be a reason people were excluded or felt left out. All right, Colleen also had a question about companies wanting leftover. It sort of depends, Colleen, on who you're working with. So with City of St. Louis Park, we try to be really specific about not dumping on our thrift store partners. We would allow our local clothing closet to come first for the clothing swaps and pick out what they wanted that was seasonally appropriate. And then we really tried, as we were folding, if there was stuff that just like, this is going to be rags, to take responsibility and dispose of that ourselves. We just, especially for smaller thrift stores, we did not want to be dumping on them in our local thrift stores. So we tried to be careful about that. If after the gardener swap, we had some like rusty metal things, we threw those in the city scrap bin and some things, but we did try to be cognizant of that as we were sorting items. Let's see here. Could the panel provide some examples of donation partners? So Jackson, great question. I know for City of St. Louis Park, I actually donated some things to the Minnesota Tool Library. We had some post hole diggers, which I tried to give away on Buy Nothing and never could get a taker. And so I actually took them to the Tool Library and they were appreciative of those, which was great. Kellie, do you have, I know you had mentioned.
The only things we really had left were pots, and the vast majority of those were broken.
Yeah.
We would have done the same thing with the tool library or reaching back out to more of the community gardens for some of the other items.
Yeah.
If we had them, but we didn't have them. So
yeah. And it was pretty similar for ours too. We actually mostly just had pots, and to be 100% honest, I live on a fairly busy street. I literally took them home, put them on the curb and put a posting on Facebook and Buy Nothing, and they were mostly gone in a matter of hours, if not a day or so. So that was really the easiest way. I recognize that's not realistic for everyone, but with the gardening swap, there's not a ton. Let's see here. Cassie hosted an event called Free Pop-Up Bookshop. Seems to get the point across without the need to donate. Yep, that's a really great way to name that too, Cassie. Sort of a free bookshop, a free swap, if you don't, or a free shop, excuse me. All right. Any other thoughts on any of those questions from panelists, the ones that were brought up in chat about leftovers, especially? Did everyone make their event open to non-residents? We made it available to everybody. Is that true for everybody else? Right.
Yep.
Yeah, we didn't check any IDs or anything. So essentially, if you knew about it and you came, you were welcome.
Yeah. To be honest, if nothing else, it was a matter of that's way too much work. Just not worth the time. Okay. Any other questions folks want to ask? Well, really great questions here in the chat. I also want to let you know I'm putting together and have been putting together for a little while and finally getting back to it, a 2-page flyer, a handout of sort of all the tips and tricks that I had learned over the years. And then for our conversations with this group, that Reuse Minnesota will make pretty here hopefully soon and share that with everybody. We'll post that on our website as a resource and be sure that everyone comes. It provides a lot of the same information, but also with some additional thoughts, especially on, Kirsten had mentioned about charging a fee and whether or not you want to charge a fee. We also had ours be free, and there's different reasons that you might do that. Or things about accessibility and inclusivity. So the language that you learn or you use around in a clothing swap, do you do things men's and women's, or do you by clothing type, so then it's more inclusive for folks regardless of gender, things like that. So there's more information, and I'll work on getting that out here in the next week or so, but there's lots of great resources. I know Cassandra from City of South St. Paul has also done swaps, and a number of others are looking at it. City of Edina has one coming up here in Earth Month, or that weekend, the day after. So there are lots of opportunities, and I'm happy to be a resource anytime. I know our panelists would as well. So thanks to our panelists today. Really, really appreciate your wisdom and sharing your experiences. And yeah, thanks to everybody for coming. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.